with me today. I appreciate you taking the time. I know things are always busy this time of year, so I'll be respectful of your time. I wanted to share this meeting, or use this meeting, to share some of my recent reflections connected to cognitive development and how I'm trying to build more critical thinking, creativity, and problem solving in my math classroom. I've been working through 2 lessons that really pushed my thinking. One was a PBS lesson that they had us do on ratios and map scales, and the other one was a tiny house project video from PBL Works. Are you familiar with the tiny house project?
No.
It was a third grade project. I think a lot of the structure could apply to older SPED students. In the well, I'll give you my reflection on the PBS lesson first. This was one that I chose. At the time I chose it, I was teaching math, and so it applied. Students use map scales to estimate the distances and calculate travel time based on speed, basically applying the proportional reasoning to a real-world task, so planning out their math. What stood out to me was how the lesson chunks the information well, starting with the video to build interest, and then guided practice, and then independent work with the ratio tables. What I realized reflecting on the cognitive development side is that I need to be more intentional about promoting that metacognition.
Mm-hmm.
It made me think, am I building enough space for students to reflect on their thinking, or am I always pushing them too fast and wanting to feed them the answers? Then the tiny house project. It was students had to design their own tiny homes, and based on client needs, and these are third graders, but they had to base it on client needs, area, perimeter, budget, personal preference. And I loved how the teacher structured it for problem solving, but also left room for creativity. So there was a lot that she gave, a lot of wiggle room that she gave them. She gave them their parameters. This is what you need to have. But then gave them a lot of creativity in how they built their homes. It gave students a low-stress way to experiment before applying the math, and it made me reflect on my own teaching, especially in SPED math, where I sometimes would get so focused on structure that I forgot students need space to grapple with problems and be creative. So thinking about the 4 primary domains of dispositions that the projects really pushed my open-mindedness, realizing that even in math there's room for creativity and exploration. Safe reflection, that I can see that sometimes I default to giving the students too many steps instead of letting them work through their own struggles. Curiosity, watching these lessons makes me curious about what projects I could adapt for my own students, even with their unique needs. And educational equity, it reminded me that authentic real-world projects can be accessible to all students if I provide the right scaffolds. It shouldn't just be reserved for general education settings. In terms of my implementation plan and SMART goals, what's crucial for me is pacing myself. I tend to want to overhaul everything at once, and I think focusing on 1 or 2 projects like this and building intentional, now teaching 6th grade ELA, just building some intentional student reflection along the way will help me stay on course without feeling overwhelmed. So, those are the projects I've been doing. The questions that I have for you, one is, how do you balance giving students their space for productive struggle, but still supporting them, especially in a SPED setting where they have like very fragile confidence?
I would say that is probably the thing I struggled with the most as I started teaching in the SPED classroom, specifically in math, because you have a very small window of a small group of kids, but the range in their ability is huge. Some of them are on modified content, and in our particular situation, sometimes we have about half that are on modified content. And then the other half, we're really trying to build those skills so that we can close those gaps. And so it was very difficult to get all of those kids kind of to the same place at the same time.
Yeah.
One thing that I would always have to, that was kind of a determining or an eye-opening thing for me, is when I would do my grade book, and then if everybody was passing with a 98, 99, 100, then I felt like I had not offered enough productive struggle.
Okay.
Because I so want them to be successful, I wasn't giving enough to challenge them, because we need to challenge them as if we do, the kids in gen ed. Also, sometimes our productive struggle ends up being 2 weeks of the same lesson because they're just not getting it. So there is such a happy medium that is really hard to find. All A's versus 2 weeks on the same concept, and then we have to be somewhere in the middle. And so I think that's one of those things where we try to stay on a pacing guide with our gen ed as much as possible, but I always maybe added about half the time for a brand new lesson. And then anytime I wanted to do real world problems, I always had to double that. So a lot of classes that I would go into had real world Wednesdays, and I loved that. But I found that doing real world Wednesdays really set me behind in my pacing, because it would take us 2 days to get through.
Yeah.
So it ended up being something that I did once a month or every other week, so that we could provide those times where there was a lot of engagement and allowing them to have creative thoughts about math, but it just couldn't happen at the same rate that it did in the gen ed class, because it took us so much longer.
Yeah. Okay. My other question for you is, have you ever adapted a project-based lesson like Tiny House Project for older students or IEPs? You said you did a lot of Real World Wednesdays, so what are some examples?
Probably my favorite one, and something that I felt like was practical to kids, was the Disney trip, and then teaching them how to budget for a month.
Okay.
And so the Disney trip was where in our gen ed classroom we gave the kids the packet, showed them a couple of things, and just let them go, and they had a great time. With our kiddos, we more or less planned a Disney trip together as a class, because that independent skill was pretty difficult for them. But we let them pick the theme parks that they went to, the way that they traveled. Did they want to drive and save money, or did they want to fly and use airplane tickets? And for a lot of kids, this is not their reality.
Right.
They've never been able to travel like this. So being able to look and see how much it would cost to be on an airplane, or look and see how much it would cost to go, I feel like maybe just gave them even something as a goal that they would want to do in the future. But then on a smaller scale, everybody likes to go out to eat, and I love Chick-fil-A, and so I always talk to the kids about Chick-fil-A. And during our lesson, our decimal unit, which was also something that I adapted from the curriculum, but with everything that we do, we have to go back to the basics, and so in order to go back to the basics but not spend a ton of time, we had a Chick-fil-A menu that I developed, and they got to go around the room and pick up, an empty box of either Chick-fil-A nuggets or Chick-fil-A fries and a cup, and they got to kind of make their own bag, and then they had to add up how much it would cost. Then we had to do the taxes, and all of that was a part of a unit when we were doing tax and tip. But just breaking it down into how do we line up our decimals, definitely not part of the state standards, but something that they need to review to be able to move past that to adding tip and those kind of things. So
and I'm sure those are lessons that stuck with the kids too,
and take a long time.
It
is not a simple 60-minute lesson, but something that they'll use in everyday life.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I really like about these real world things. It's not only more interesting and engaging to the kids, but stuff that they're actually going to use outside of school, which is particularly for our kids was really important. Thank you again for your time and all your support. I really appreciate your feedback, and we will meet again soon in a few minutes.